Thank you. My name is Ling Tan, and I am a volunteer and co-founder of Safe Grow Montgomery. We are a grassroots coalition based in Montgomery County, Maryland, and our goal was to protect public health by reducing exposure to landscape pesticides. I want to introduce a very special person here today, and he's from Maryland, and he's a leader that I admire very much. He is notably quoted as stating, "The science may never be conclusive since it involves complex chemical interactions, but the absence of incontrovertible evidence does not justify inaction." He has a history of and is an advocate of issues relating to the health and well-being of Montgomery County citizens. When parents in our grassroots group first approached him about our concerns with landscape pesticide exposure in our communities, he was open-minded and he actually asked for more information about our concerns. So in the following years, as he delved into the studies and research and reports on pesticides, and he also heard from both sides of the issue, he became more committed and more devoted to the issue of protecting people, all people, especially the most vulnerable in our community. So in a county with over 1 million residents, he's the lead sponsor and passionate champion of a landmark ordinance that protects children, pets, wildlife, and our delicate environment from the harms of lawn and landscape pesticide use. So Montgomery County is now the largest jurisdiction in the U.S. to restrict the cosmetic use of pesticides, which includes herbicides on both public and private properties. So in his role as county president, he is credited with leading our large and diverse county towards safer and healthier communities. So today he will speak on the power of local government to lead in protecting communities when federal regulations fall short. I'm truly honored to welcome Montgomery County Council President George Leventhal.
I'm really, really delighted to join you. I want to thank Jay Feldman and the staff here at Beyond Pesticides. I'm so appreciative of the honor of being invited to speak with you about the Healthy Lawns Law in Montgomery County. And how do these slides work now? Am I going to click? So as you heard from Ling Tan, who is an extraordinary organizer in her own right, we do have now in place in Montgomery County very, very strong prohibition against the use of toxic chemicals on private property as well as public property. And let me just tell you a little bit about Montgomery County, which I'm proud to tell you was the home of Rachel Carson. We are the largest county in Maryland. We include communities like Bethesda, Silver Spring, Wheaton, Gaithersburg, Rockville. We're very proud of being recognized by the Natural Resources Defense Council as the best farmland protection in the entire United States. Out of more than 3,100 counties, we in the 1980s decided to set aside 1/3 of the county for agricultural preservation. And we've passed many laws to protect the public health and safety. We have a very enlightened body politic, very well-educated body politic. We're the home of the National Institutes of Health and many other federal agencies. As you see from the map, we're just immediately north of the District of Columbia. And so our well-educated public has, over many years, supported efforts to protect public health and safety through strong action at the local level. And one of our municipalities, which happens to be the municipality in which I live, the city of Tacoma Park, Maryland, next slide. Passed a law that was modeled after the law here in Ogunquit, Maine. And there was quite a strong effort mounted to educate the public about cosmetic lawn pesticides, about organic alternatives, and two of the women, Catherine Cummings and Julie Tadeo, who live in the city of Tacoma Park and who had expressed the desire that their children should be safe from spraying. And I believe, Ling, you also have a daughter with asthma, if I'm correct about that. So moms, basically, who were concerned about their children's exposure to substances on their neighbors' yards that were causing adverse health effects, Julie and Catherine went to the Tacoma Park City Council, and it was quite robust dialogue and debate. And during that debate, I live in Tacoma Park, Julie and Catherine, who I didn't know at that time, but who I've gotten to know very well, approached me and said, would you, as a county council member, please write to the mayor and city council in this town, Tacoma Park, where I live, to support this measure? And I declined to do it. I said, first of all, I don't understand the issue. I really don't know about pesticide exposure. And secondly, if I express support for it at the city level, the next step will be you'll come to me and ask me to do it at the county level, and I'm not ready for that. I'm just not familiar with it, and I don't want to take that on. So the Tacoma Park law prohibits the use on people's lawns of any pesticide classified as carcinogenic to humans or likely to be carcinogenic by EPA, any pesticide classified by EPA as a restricted use product, any pesticide classified as a Class 9 pesticide by the Ontario, Canada Ministry of the Environment, and any pesticide classified as a Category 1 endocrine disruptor by the European Commission. Up until 2013, I had only heard from a handful of constituents over the years about overuse of pesticides, but the law passed, and I live in the town, and I saw that the world didn't fall apart when the legislation went into effect. There was no noticeable effect on the attractiveness of my very pretty suburb where I've lived for 30 years. Yards still looked great, and there were lawn care companies still in business, still servicing and taking care of people's property. And so it began to dawn on me that this certainly wasn't threatening or harmful to anybody's property values. And once the Tacoma Park law passed, I was much more open to learning more about the issue. And and indeed, as I anticipated, the Safe Grow movement requested to meet with me. I'm chairman of our county council's health committee. And so I wanted to learn more, and so in the summer of 2013, I asked the chair of the County Council's Transportation and Environment Committee to convene a briefing on pesticide use in the county. We heard from our school system, our Parks Department, both of which reported alarmingly high use of pesticides on playing fields that children utilize. Our county's Department of Environmental Protection and our county's Department of General Services, which oversees county-owned property. We heard from City of Tacoma Park leaders about their Safe Grow law and officials from the District of Columbia government, which has enacted very strong legislation which goes beyond EPA regulations, but not as far as the City of Tacoma Park. It prevents the use of cosmetic pesticides on District of Columbia property and then creates buffer zones near watersheds and around child care facilities. So I came away from the meeting alarmed at the amount of pesticides that were being used on school and park property and persuaded that it was appropriate to act in this area. So over the course of the next few months, my staff and I worked with the county council's attorneys to draft a bill that provided additional protections for the public's health and safety. And like a lot of politicians, I tried to find an acceptable compromise that all sides might agree to. We went back and forth for several months with our attorney until we finally had a bill that we were ready to share with stakeholders. Let's go to the next slide, please. Nope, the one after that. Yep, okay. And so I had a compromise draft, which we called the discussion draft. It was meant to stimulate conversation among opponents and proponents. And this is not what passed. This was the initial discussion draft, and it would have restricted the use of pesticides at parks, playing fields, child care facilities, playgrounds, and all county-owned property. It would have required that any owner in a homeowners association be given the opportunity each year to opt out of the application of pesticides to that owner's property. It required an election in a homeowners association that would have application of pesticides in common areas approved by a majority of owners voting. and it would have required the posting of notice when a private property owner applies a pesticide to a lawn with an area of more than 100 square feet. So I thought this was a pretty good step forward, and I asked the lobbyist who'd already been retained by RISE. How many of you are familiar with RISE? So RISE is an interest group funded by the chemical industry, which is the enemy of Beyond Pesticides. If you want an absolute counterpoint to this entire conference, RISE is it. And there is no issue, and they were active in Algonquin, Maine, they were active in Tacoma Park, Maryland. No matter how small the community, they view this entire conversation that we're having here in Portland as a threat to their fundamental interests. Monsanto is a primary contributor. But I met, and they hired a local lobbyist, and I met with that individual who by this time had already picked up our Montgomery County Farm Bureau as a client. And then I met with Safe Grow Montgomery, and everybody hated this discussion draft. Universally, the opponents of legislation did not want any conversation, any restriction, any discussion at all. They were not willing to support half measures. They were not willing to support anything. They told me they would fight to the death to prevent it, and Safe Grow Montgomery was disappointed. They wanted something that more closely resembled the Tacoma Park Ordinance, and they just felt that the discussion draft didn't go far enough. So I knew that this would be a controversial issue. I knew that there would be a significant learning curve, as there had been and continues to be for me. And so I knew that we were not going to get any legislation through unless somebody supported it. And so the more I listened to Safe Grow advocates, the more I came to agreement that we needed fundamental change that went much farther in a meaningful way. So I decided to scrap the half measure and pursue the approach adopted by the city of Tacoma Park, which would restrict the use of pesticides on private as well as county-owned property. Next slide. And so during the first half of 2015, the Healthy Lawns Act began to pick up momentum. And so it was not precisely the same as Tacoma Park's law. We did not adopt any foreign standards for determining what chemicals will be on the registry. We had a lot of testimony suggesting that if we're basing our judgments on what happens in Canada or Europe or alien places like that, we probably wouldn't be taken seriously. And so we address only EPA-registered pesticides, and our Department of Environmental Protection will be developing a registry which indicates the substances that are banned for use for cosmetic purposes and also in public areas. So we restrict the use of the cosmetic use of EPA-registered pesticides in places where children are most likely to be exposed, public as well as private lawns, people's own homes, playgrounds, mulch recreation areas, and children's facilities such as child care centers. And we had intense and stiff opposition from our Parks Department, and there were threats about how recreation facilities, playing fields would become unplayable, and so we had to make a number of compromises with my colleagues. So what we have now is the Parks Department will conduct a 5-field pesticide-free pilot with the goal of maintaining all playing fields without pesticides by 2020. We do have a lot of exemptions. The bill does not apply to gardens, trees or shrubs, golf courses, playing fields, although the Parks Department will get there by 2020, hardscapes, indoor pest control, the control of noxious weeds or invasive species for human health or agricultural purposes, or to prevent significant economic damage. So the County Council held 2 public hearings, which is unusual. We usually only have 1. Both were standing room only in January and February of 2015. Each was attended by more than 600 people. This was followed by 3 committee meetings in the spring where council members were briefed on how pesticides are regulated, under-regulated by the EPA and state, heard from health experts on what the latest science has to say about potential health concerns, and engaged in a back and forth with practitioners of both organic and conventional lawn care. I want to recognize Chip Osborne, who's here, who was a tremendous resource to us. Traveled down from Connecticut several times to answer our questions and to persuade certainly me and my colleagues who voted for the bill did not pass unanimously, that you could indeed maintain playing fields, you could indeed maintain lawns in a very healthy and desirable manner, and in fact, once you restore the balance to the soil, it's a much healthier practice in the long run. So after the summer recess, we resumed work on the bill, and in mid-September, the Transportation and Environment Committee gutted the bill. And by a 2-to-1 vote, the committee eliminated the most significant provisions of the bill. But I knew that in the 9-member county council, I was president last year. Ling introduced me as president. That's very kind. We rotate the presiding officer role each year, so I'm the immediate past president. But I got to be president because I'm pretty good at counting votes, and I knew that I had the votes once we could get the bill to the full county council. But we did have to make some concessions. Of 9 members, 5 is a majority, and because of the alarm bells that were being rung by our Parks Department, we did have to make the significant concession of exempting playing fields from the bill and adopting the 2020 date by which the Parks Department is supposed to go pesticide-free. On the morning of the vote, one of the council members called me up and said she would vote. This was not a vote I was counting on, and in fact, she had voted to gut the bill in committee. She would vote for it if we delayed the effective date for private property, for homeowners, a year until January 1st of 2018 to give county government more time to educate people, to enable homeowners and lawn care companies to have another year to adapt. This was not my preference, but I felt that having a 6-to-3 vote was definitely stronger and also enough to override a veto in case the executive, our county executive is in effect our mayor, in case he decided to veto it. So I went along with that concession, and I do think that the optics of a 6-to-3 vote were substantially better than a 5-to-4 vote. The response from residents on Bill 5214 revealed that there was a strong undercurrent of residents who understood the threat that pesticides posed to public health and safety, but they needed a galvanizing force. The correspondence we received was overwhelmingly in favor of our legislation. We received over 3,000 emails from residents in support of Bill 5214. We received less than 700 from residents opposed. 75% supported the bill and only 25% opposed it. No one on the county council, and including me, expected this enormous preponderance of support for what we were trying to do. Early on, when we were considering the bill, I was working very closely with the chairman of the Transportation and Environment Committee. He feels strongly about environmental protection, and I thought that we were going to be able to work together, but in 2014, by surprise, he ended up with an opponent in the primary election. And he represents some of the wealthiest areas of our county, Bethesda, Chevy Chase, Potomac, and I think he feared that there would be homeowners who wanted to keep their lawns weed-free and dandelion-free, and that it would become a political liability. So he changed from being a partner and supporter to being an opponent. He tried to find ways, and I share all this with you because I hope that each of you will go back to your communities and seek similar protective legislation. I see our council member from South Portland is here now. Why don't you stand up, council member? Let's give her a hand. Huh? South Portland is going to vote for a cosmetic pesticide ban next week. And so as...
Not going to happen next week. It'll end up in workshops after next week.
Well, they're taking it up for discussion next week. So, you know, this is going to happen in communities around the United States, and I hope that our experience will assist you as you're working for this, that, you know, these are the kinds of things that occur. So, this council member, the chairman of the Environment Committee, sent a letter to the National Cancer Institute asking the director of NCI to weigh in on the county's proposed ban, hoping that they would say the science is too inconclusive to justify a ban. He also sought to undermine the bill by requesting that the state attorney general's office issue an opinion on whether the council was preempted by state law from enacting the bill. The attorney general declined at that time to issue an opinion, but later, when a state legislator was prompted by the Farm Bureau to ask for an attorney general's opinion, the assistant attorney general opined that it was not clear whether we are preempted, which of course the Farm Bureau and others interpreted as you are preempted and you may not do this. And indeed, it's entirely possible that RISE or other interest groups will take this to court, so we need to be prepared as to whether we have authority and jurisdiction under Maryland law to act in this manner. Even the morning of the final vote, so then later, after it got out of committee, this same council member circulated an alternative bill, which closely mirrored the discussion draft that I had originally put forth, which would have instituted, without a mandate, a goal of reducing pesticide use in the county by 50% by 2018 and requiring residents to sign a piece of paper acknowledging that before a lawn care company could apply pre-emergence or fertilizers or other substances that they are aware of the health risks posed by pesticides. I know all of you have had the experience of signing contracts that you don't fully understand. Even when you download software, you click, yes, I accept the terms and conditions without reading them. But what he found was that this half measure, as with my half measure earlier, garnered no support from the Farm Bureau or RISE, and that his legislation, his alternative, couldn't succeed if nobody was writing us in support of it. Even on the morning of the final vote, he tried to obstruct passage of the bill by employing a procedural rule to force the council to vote individually on the bill's many provisions so that he could score some points with environmentalists on areas where they agreed, but this strategy failed, and the council agreed to pass the bill on a 6-3 vote. Let's see the next slide, please. We'll get to that in a moment. So, at every step of the way, I communicated with my colleagues. I provided them with the research I was relying on so they could have the benefit of the information that I was using as justification for the bill. I spent a year researching the issue and soliciting feedback on various drafts before I introduced the bill in October of 2014. This gave my colleagues time to do their own research. And I didn't want to do this in a rush. I did not want my colleagues to feel pressured into taking a position. At all times, I used only peer-reviewed research studies, especially research published within the last 3 years that could stand up to the harshest scrutiny from the pesticide industry. Our council attorney made the unfortunate mistake of citing non-authoritative sources, such as WebMD, in his packet, and opponents immediately seized on that, saying that the council was relying on questionable science. Perhaps the strongest argument in favor of our bill was the American Academy of Pediatrics' 2012 policy statement, which resonated with council members. But after a period of time, the opposition tried to co-opt the policy statement into its own arguments, saying that the statement didn't call for banning pesticides. It instead urged decision makers to implement integrated pest management. The pesticide industry even went so far as to contact authors of the American Academy of Pediatrics report and members of the Council on Environmental Health Executive Committee to try to find pediatricians who would say the council's legislation was ill-conceived. They didn't find any. In 2 years, the opposition ultimately was unsuccessful in finding one single health professional to argue against Bill 5214. In my communications with my fellow council members, I laid out the many ways in which the EPA regulatory approach was broken and failing the public. I highlighted the synergistic effects of pesticides, pointing out that EPA tests chemicals in isolation and that current tests are not representative of real-world exposure scenarios. Council members, like the general public, want to believe that the EPA is protecting us, so it was crucial to show how inadequate and out of date the EPA's regulations and regulatory regime is. Because only 7 states give their local jurisdictions the ability to legislate in this area, we routinely cited the fact that a majority of provinces in Canada have enacted restrictions on the use of pesticides, like the one we were contemplating. Moreover, there were data showing that the lawn care industry in Canada had actually grown in terms of the number of lawn care companies and number of employees per company since the enactment of pesticide bans, which flew in the face of opposition claims that Bill 5214 would put all these lawn care professionals out of business. Some opponents tried to diminish the importance of the data by saying that because it did not distinguish between pesticide applicators and general lawn care companies, you could not conclude that a ban would have a positive economic impact on the industry, but that fortunately was not persuasive to council members. The cost of transitioning to organic lawn care was a big concern to several council members. It was critical to reassure council members that organic lawn care is not cost prohibitive. The council heard from several organic practitioners, and they reported that transitioning to a natural or organic turf management program can cost a little more money in the first year or two, but that come the third or fourth year, when you're dealing with healthy soil, homeowners could expect to see cost savings, and by the fifth year could pay as much as 50% or more less than what they previously were paying for conventional turf management. It was important to show the council members that Bill 5214 was not all that radical, and that the county council had a long history of applying the precautionary principle to public health issues, whether they were aware of it or not. In the late 1990s, Montgomery County was among the first jurisdictions in the United States to ban smoking in bars and restaurants. In the first years of the 21st century, we prohibited the sale of trans fats in prepared food, and more recently we banned the use of e-cigarettes, where traditional cigarettes are already prohibited, and so council members who had voted for all those measures understood that it was an appropriate role for local government to act to protect the public health and safety, even ahead of and in front of the federal government's activity. And I also allowed each council member who was in favor of the bill to offer strengthening or clarifying amendments so that each supporting council member had a piece of it and could brag about it as a co-author. My office made sure that each council member could claim credit for a certain provision that made it into the final bill. Let's go to the next. I want you to hear these examples of the media coverage. We got a lot of attention in the Washington, D.C. area. Next slide. So these are headlines, each of them from the Washington Post. The second one was the news article, and I'll play an excerpt from the radio interview where I was roughed up. The first headline is a letter to the editor saying that crazy liberal Democrats can't be trusted, and then the Washington Post actually ran an editorial whose talking points were straight from Rise, word for word, titled "A Green Plan's Weak Roots." Next slide. And this was an editorial cartoon in our local Gazette newspaper, which described me as Dr. No from James Bond. We had passed a prohibition on pet stores selling puppies from puppy mills, and we had banned the use of styrofoam, polystyrene products in food service. I proposed to ban pesticides. We had long ago banned smoking in public places, trans fats, and so they said that I was trying to ban fun. So they had some fun with me. I had never been the subject of an editorial cartoon before, and I have to say I've been in public office a long time, and so I found it really funny. I laughed at it as you did, and I circulated it myself on social media because I actually thought it reflected pretty well on me. They don't draw cartoons about you in the newspaper unless you're actually making things happen. So I felt really good about it, and I have a framed version of this cartoon hanging in my office. Next slide. Okay, so Jeremy, if we can get the sound here, this is where I was on right-wing talk radio.
Let me also ask, how are you going to enforce this pesticide law? Because people can just go over to Prince George's County or go across the river to Virginia and buy these pesticides. Are you going to have people policing what they're putting on their lawn?
The bill does not affect the sale of these materials, so they're for sale in Montgomery County.
So how are you policing this?
Like most law, for example, most local governments require that individuals must cut their grass. If your grass grows too long, almost everywhere, I don't think that's considered a nanny state provision. And it's complaint driven, so what will often happen, let's say you have a distressed property or a foreclosed property, neighbors will complain that the property is not being maintained, the grass is not being cut, and then the code enforcement division in this case with lawn getting too high would go and respond to the complaint. In the case of lawn chemicals, it would be the same thing. It would be the Department of
Environmental. But you can still go to Home Depot and get the stuff?
Yes, that's correct.
Well, I'm confused. Why in the world would you ban it and then allow it to be sold?
Well, there are legal applications even under this bill. For example, this bill doesn't affect agriculture. We're not telling farmers what they may or may not use. So the products are legal and for sale.
Wait, so these pesticides are so bad, but it's okay to put it in the food that the farmers are growing?
Are you asserting the pesticides are bad, or are you being sarcastic?
No, I'm taking your argument. I'm not being sarcastic. I just don't understand the logic behind this. You're saying the pesticides harm the environment, so we can't use it on our lawns, but it's okay for farmers to put it on our food? I don't get that logic.
I understand that you don't get the logic.
So that was just an example of having to be prepared. The opponents would make this case that the bill was flawed. They opposed the bill altogether, and just be prepared for this, because if you create any exemption at the insistence of any segment of industry, then other segments of industry will say, because you've granted exemption, the bill is fundamentally flawed. We did not want to debate the agriculture issue. We were taking on something where it was vividly clear that homeowners have natural and organic alternatives available to them. We value our agriculture industry. I'm certainly cognizant of the public health concerns as we've been detailing this weekend, but there were certain fights that we didn't feel that we were ready to take on. This was a new issue for me and other elected officials. Same thing with golf courses. Golf is a very competitive business, and we did not want to be in a situation where Montgomery County golf courses had dandelions or clumps of various types of weeds, and because the industry is so focused on this, they would monitor whether golfers were fleeing the county to play the game. So perhaps over time we will discuss these other issues, but as a first bite at the apple, we approached it the way we did. But then of course that our accommodation to political reality got used by the opponents, just as you heard here on this conservative talk radio program. Then you're saying it's not safe for our lawns, but it is safe to put on our food. Of course, they would not support a pesticide ban on food either. Next slide. This was the excerpt from the Washington Post. This is straight out of Rise's propaganda. Sponsored by County Council President George Leventhal, the bill to ban the use of such products is largely symbolic. That alone makes it unconvincing. It would exempt farmland, some county-owned property, and possibly other tracts, meaning much of Montgomery acreage would get a pass. There'd be little real enforcement beyond neighbors tattling on each other. Sale of the products would still be allowed. No county inspectors would fan out to survey tens of thousands of yards. I assure you they don't support having county inspectors or lawn police. They weren't proposing that we include farmland or golf courses. And fines would top out at $75, not exactly a muscular deterrence regime. Here again, had we come in with a very heavy-handed approach with high fines at the beginning of something that people really didn't understand very well, we would have been attacked for that. So you're going to be criticized no matter what approach you take. Next slide. So can we click on this and see the television coverage?
It's going to change the way a lot of local residents care for their landscaping. Montgomery County passed a tough new law today that bans pesticides from private lawns. But as News 4's Chris Gordon reports, now it's such a contentious issue, it may face a court challenge.
TS Bill 5214 is adopted on a 6-3 vote.
Parents wearing the green shirts celebrated. In blue, lawn care professionals are left worrying what the pesticide ban will mean to them.
No, we're not allowed to use certain things. Your results are going to be minimal. And in the long term, I really think it'll put the industry out of business.
The Montgomery County Council is the first government in the U.S. to ban pesticides on private lawns. They can't be used after January 1st, 2018, and the council ordered County Parks and Recreation to find safer alternatives for playing fields by 2020.
The technology and methodology exists to have beautiful green, lush lawns with the use of organic and natural methods, not requiring the poisoning of our soil.
Leventhal was hugged by members of the group Safe Grow Montgomery, who worry about the health dangers of pesticides to people and pets.
I can't believe it, really, that we've gotten to today and that we actually have had this vote passed to protect our health and protect the health of our kids, of our neighbors, of workers, everybody.
Lawn care professionals say this fight may not be over.
Meaning there could be litigation, things could change between now and January 1st, 2018.
Opponents of the pesticide ban raise the possibility that they might seek a referendum to ask the voters to decide whether or not they want a pesticide ban. In Montgomery County, Chris Gordon, News 4.
That's a great clip. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so some of this I've already gone over. We overwhelmingly, thanks to the great efforts of Safe Grow Montgomery, heard more on a 75-25% ratio from those who supported it. Tremendous activity over the email. And next slide. This is the efforts of Safe Grow Montgomery, of which Ling Tan was one of the key organizers. Next slide. So they were moms. This is Catherine Cummings, Julie Tadeo, Alex Stavisky-Zinedine, and Ling Tan, who wanted to protect their kids. Next slide. And we also built a broad-based coalition of environmental, health, community, and business interests. The Sierra Club assisted us, and my great friend Scott Nash, if you are familiar with his chain of organic groceries, Mom's Organic Market, strongly endorsed the bill and distributed material at his stores supporting the bill. Next slide. And it was really funny. Safe Grow Montgomery, they were great to work with. I just love them. And they had a sense of humor, which is always welcome. My colleague who I mentioned earlier, who chairs the Environment Committee, predicted a citizen rebellion if Montgomery County passed Bill 5214, and so Safe Grow Montgomery imagined what that citizen rebellion would look like. Who are these people with the pitchforks who want more pesticides in their park and need them now? This was just one of many examples of a very strong presence, which really kind of shamed the opponents of the bill, into understanding that their position was not popular and that it couldn't be defended. It was just great work. I've never worked with a pun intended, grassroots group as effective and energetic as this one. It's just been a privilege to work with them and to continue working with them. Next slide. And they also, when there was criticism of the bill, they weighed in. Here's Jennifer Quinn, one of the other moms supporting the bill, writing to the Gazette, illustrated by the cartoon I showed you earlier, supporting me and supporting the lawn care bill. And, look, it is really important to thank your courageous legislators who are out front on this. I'm grateful to Beyond Pesticides for giving me this opportunity. When you have an elected official who's willing to take the heat and stand up to this, thank that elected official and show them the love. It really makes a lot of difference, as you all are doing just by having me here in Portland. Next slide. We developed a network of local health professionals who spoke in favor of the bill. Here we have a pediatrician, epidemiologist, and the dean for global health at Mount Sinai testifying in support of our ordinance. Next slide. And then Safe Grow Montgomery is still involved. Rockville is a large municipality. It's the county seat, but it has its own laws. Our county laws don't affect them, and so they're working to get them to opt in to the county ordinance, and Safe Grow Montgomery is continuing to be involved. They worked in favor of the Pollinator Protection Act, which just passed the Maryland General Assembly, continuing to monitor these issues and staying active, and I hope continuing to support Councilmember Leventhal. Next slide. So I'm going to close with some suggestions for other communities that want to take this on. You really do need to work with your Parks Department. Our bill was significantly weakened because of opposition from the Parks Department. And I know that the city of Boulder, who's represented here at this conference, has had a lot of success on its playing fields. We, all of us, Beyond Pesticides around the country, have got to assemble successful examples to go up against those who will ring the alarm bells about this. And begin with a briefing. Just begin with information. Once you get the information, elected officials start to understand there's something not right about exposing children and community members and pets. Enormous number of concerns raised by pet owners who found that once the lawn had been treated, the pets would come in with tumorous growths and other problems from exposure. So just a briefing is the dawning of consciousness. And I don't know if anyone could develop an advocacy network as effective as the one we had in Montgomery County, but if you can, I urge you to have an established advocacy network before a bill is introduced. Highlight areas, including Montgomery County, Maryland, where the elected body in your own jurisdiction has applied a precautionary principle previously, and elected officials need to be reassured about the cost and efficacy of organic lawn care. So if you can identify organic practitioners in your jurisdiction, it helps to have a relationship with those lawn care professionals. Next slide. So that's my presentation. I just want to again tell you how delighted and honored I am to join this convocation of people who care about this righteous issue. It's been a great learning opportunity for me to be here. I've gotten a ton of good ideas to go back to Montgomery County with and to try to implement. I'm eager to stay in contact with all of you, and I just commend all of you for taking this on. It's not easy anytime you go up against well-funded, organized interest groups. You know that it's going to be challenging, but we did ultimately prevail in the Washington, D.C. suburbs, and I'm confident that this is a movement that's going to grow around the United States. One of my colleagues, Tom Hucker, on the Montgomery County Council said what I think is one of the best things I heard about this. He said, "I'd rather have my kids play on a field with a few weeds and no chemicals than on a field that's been treated with chemicals that has no weeds." Thank you very much.